Welcome to Weekly News Highlights, where we wrap up your week with a glimpse back into what went on over the past week. I'm Kim Dami in Seoul. North Korea said it test-fired a new Bulhwasal 3-31 strategic cruise missile for the first time on Wednesday. The regime claimed the test fire is part of the process of constantly updating the regime's weapon system. South Korea's economy grew 1.4% in 2023, as expected by the government. But it was still the lowest growth in 3 years because of poor exports and tightening monetary policies around the world. Donald Trump became the Republican Party's frontrunner after securing another big win at the New Hampshire primary against Nikki Haley, his only Republican rival left in the race. North Korea this week test-fired a new type of cruise missile dubbed the Bulhwasal 3-31. Now, Bulhwasal means fire arrow in Korean. And these cruise missiles do not violate the UN Security Council resolutions as the regime's ballistic missile launches do. But that also doesn't mean the cruise missile launches can be legitimized. Our Kim Jong-sil explains.
North Korea says the cruise missile that it fired on Wednesday morning was its new strategic cruise missile called the Bulhwasal 3-31. Bulhwasal means fire arrow in Korean. The North claimed the test was part of an ongoing renewal of its weapon systems and is a regular and obligatory activity of its missile and defense science agencies. Previously, its very similar cruise missiles were just called Hwasal 1 and 2, meaning arrow.
By giving it a complicated name, North Korea appears to be highly intent on threat propaganda, as if it's developing a new weapons system.
North Korea's underwater drone carrying a strategic nuclear weapon is called the Hail-2 unmanned underwater nuclear attack boat. The South Korean military provided analysis during a briefing on Thursday morning.
The cruise missile launched by North Korea yesterday had somewhat shorter flight distance compared to those launched in the past. We believe this time the test was intended to improve the performance of existing cruise missiles.
Experts say cruise missiles can hit targets precisely from long range, but because they are slow, they can be shut down if detected. It's for this reason that the UN Security Council hasn't banned cruise missiles as opposed to ballistic missiles for North Korea. But experts said Pyongyang's cruise missiles can pose just as much of a threat if they can carry nuclear warheads as claimed by the North. Tensions are rising on the Korean peninsula, with the regime carrying out its second missile provocation in 10 days after it launched a solid-fueled IRBM on January 14th. Kim Jong-sil, 아리랑뉴스.
And in the meantime, North Korea continued to mess around with illegal cyber activities in 2023. In fact, carrying out the most it's ever done. Now, this signals a red flag, especially for South Korean authorities ahead of the April general election. Shin Yeon reports.
Despite measures from the International Society to prevent further cyber attacks, 2023 was the most active year for North Korean-linked hackers. According to Chainalysis, an American blockchain analysis firm, 20 cryptocurrency platform attacks have been traced back to North Korea, which is the highest number of attacks since 2016, when data was first compiled. The total attacks from last year account for approximately $1 billion worth of crypto assets. The number of cyber attacks started to increase from 2020 as North Korean-affiliated groups such as Kim Suk-hee and the Lazarus Group targeted different cryptocurrency platforms and exploited decentralized finance protocols. North Korean attackers have allegedly stolen a whopping amount of cryptocurrency to fund nuclear programs, though the regime denies any claims of hacking. Pyongyang faces multiple UN sanctions as well as those from the U.S. Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control and South Korean authorities to limit illicitly obtained and laundered funds. This comes as South Korea's intelligence agency reported on Wednesday that 80% of attempts to hack South Korea's public institutions last year were attributed to North Korean-related hacker groups. Mostly to fund its weapons program, South Korea's National Intelligence Agency predicts that Pyongyang's hacking attempts and dissemination of fake news are expected to be more frequent throughout this year as election season approaches both in Washington and Seoul. The NIS has pledged to strengthen measures to respond to cyber attacks by creating a task force team and establishing heightened responses. 신예은, 아리랑뉴스.
Russian leader Vladimir Putin's visit to North Korea became official after North Korea's top diplomat Choi Son-hee visited Moscow. But according to the Kremlin, the visit will come after Russia's March presidential election. Lee Seung-jae has more.
Amid speculation that Russian President Vladimir Putin will be visiting North Korea for talks with Kim Jong-un, the Kremlin said Tuesday that it is unlikely to be before the presidential election in March. According to Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, it won't be possible for the Russian leader to visit Pyongyang before the presidential election, with such a visit a longer-term plan. However, Peskov added that Putin will be visiting the north when the two sides can discuss and agree to a set schedule. After meeting with the North Korean leader at the Vostochny Cosmodrome in the Russian Far East in September last year, Putin accepted Kim's invitation to visit North Korea. Last week, the Kremlin announced that it was coordinating the timing of President Putin's return visit to North Korea through diplomatic channels and would announce it as soon as it was confirmed. Meanwhile, White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said Tuesday that the U.S. is keeping an appropriate defensive posture against North Korean threats. He added that Washington is watching the situation on the Korean Peninsula very closely and is confident in the level of defense posture in the region. The comments come amid tensions heightened by Pyongyang's continued weapons test and hardening rhetoric. When asked to comment on a possible visit by Putin to North Korea, Kirby reiterated Washington's concerns over growing military ties between Pyongyang and Moscow. Lee Seung-jae, 아리랑뉴스.
Over in Geneva, where China's human rights situation was reviewed by UN members, South Korea called on Beijing to provide protection for North Korean defectors amid growing concerns about the repatriation of North Koreans there. Bae-eun-ji reports.
During the United Nations review of China's human rights situation held in Geneva on Tuesday, South Korea urged China to provide adequate protection to North Korean defectors. This is the first time that the country has directly mentioned the issue of the human rights of North Korean defectors during such a review of China.
We recommend that China provide adequate protection to escapees of foreign origin, including the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
South Korea's ambassador to the UN also said Seoul recommends Beijing consider adopting a national refugee law as part of its efforts to implement the 1951 Refugee Convention. Under the system called the Universal Periodic Review, or UPR, the United Nations calls for each member state to undergo a peer review of its human rights records every 4.5 years. Ahead of the review, Seoul's foreign ministry explained Tuesday that it aims to step up efforts to protect the rights of North Korean defectors.
We have been actively engaging in diplomatic efforts at bilateral and multilateral levels to ensure that the North Korean defectors residing abroad can safely and quickly travel to their desired destinations. These efforts include close coordination with relevant countries and raising the issue of North Korean defectors at the international level.
This comes after China reportedly deported hundreds of North Korean defectors against their will on October 9th last year. Civic groups in South Korea say as many as 2,600 people have been forcibly sent back to North Korea since last August. And the Human Rights Watch says the defectors, mostly women, could face imprisonment, sexual violence, or even death once they're back in the north. Bae-eun-ji, 아리랑뉴스.
Former U.S. President Donald Trump won the New Hampshire Republican primary on Tuesday, further cementing his position as the frontrunner in the party's presidential nomination. Now, that brings him closer to a rematch with incumbent President Joe Biden. For more, we're joined by our foreign affairs correspondent, Bae-eun-ji. Welcome back, Eun-ji.
Thanks for having me.
So, Eun-ji, let's talk about the New Hampshire primary election back on Tuesday. Why is it so important?
Well, to give you a brief explanation, primaries and caucuses are the methods that are used in the U.S. to select candidates for political parties before the actual presidential election in November. Primary voters choose their preferred candidate by casting ballots anonymously, whereas caucuses are meetings run by political parties that are held at the county or district level. The outcomes of these contests are taken into account to award delegates to the winners. Candidates must reach a certain number of delegates to win the nomination and appear on the general election ballot in November. The New Hampshire primary that was held on Tuesday was the first in a series of primary elections and the second presidential nominating contest following the Iowa caucus last week. Results of the contest in Iowa and New Hampshire are seen as having a big influence on media coverage and public perception. They do not guarantee the winner of the party's nomination, but it does give the candidate early momentum. In fact, after Trump's decisive win in the Iowa caucus, biotech company founder Vivek Ramaswamy dropped out of the race for the Republican presidential nomination. And Florida Governor Ron DeSantis also suspended his bid just before the New Hampshire primary.
So that leaves Trump with just one opponent. I know Republican primary election has just begun, but it seems very likely that Trump's name will make it on the ballot in November, right?
That's right. As you mentioned earlier, the former president defeated his last remaining Republican opponent, Nikki Haley, in the New Hampshire primary this week. For Trump, this was a huge step toward winning a third consecutive Republican nomination for the presidential election.
And just a little note to Nikki, she's not going to win. She's not going to win.
Tuesday's outcome follows his landslide victory in the Iowa caucus last week, making him the first non-incumbent Republican to win both states. Nikki Haley, the former South Carolina governor, congratulated Trump, but refused to drop out, claiming the contest is far from over, with many states left to cast their votes.
New Hampshire is first in the nation. It is not the last in the nation. This race is far from over. There are dozens of states left to go. And the next one is my sweet state of South Carolina.
But despite her efforts, Haley now faces growing pressure from Republicans to drop out of the race.
Well, Unji, I have to point out, incumbent President Joe Biden also won the Republican primary in New Hampshire this week. This means a rematch between him and Trump is also very highly likely.
That's right. Joe Biden won through an unusual write-in effort in New Hampshire's Democratic primary election. Despite his name not even being on the ballot, Biden easily defeated his two top rivals. This comes after months of heated disagreement between New Hampshire Democrats and the National Party over the primary calendar. The Democratic National Committee decided to change the rules by making South Carolina the first nominating contest of the year, which goes against a century-old tradition of New Hampshire hosting the first primary. Outraged over the decision, the state of New Hampshire decided to schedule its primary ahead of South Carolina's anyway, in accordance with their own laws. This resulted in Biden loyalists unofficially writing his name on the ballot, as he was not among the candidates listed. With Trump increasingly likely to be the Republican nominee for the White House race in November, Tuesday's victory brings him closer to a rematch with incumbent President Joe Biden.
Well, Unji, I have to point out we still have 10 months until the presidential election in November. What's next? I mean, when's the next Republican nomination race?
Well, Nevada and the Virgin Islands are up next on the calendar. But the major battle will be on February 24th in South Carolina, where Haley served as a governor. From then on, a series of primaries and caucuses nationwide will lead up to the Republican National Convention in July, when the party's delegates will officially select their nominee.
Well, I guess we'll have to keep an eye on how the results in South Carolina will turn out next month.
Right. If Trump wins again in South Carolina, a rematch between Trump and Biden will be inevitable.
All right. Thank you, Unji, for the wrap-up today.
My pleasure.
The commute to Seoul City is notorious, especially during rush hours. To help those commuters save time and energy, high-speed intercity train lines will be extended and available starting this March. Kim Do-yeon has details.
From 70 minutes to just 20. That's how much time the Great Train Express, or GTX, will cut for those commuting from Dongtan in Gyeonggi-do Province to Suseol in Gangnam of Seoul, starting this March as the first GTX line, Line A, opens. That's according to President Yoon Suk-yeol on Thursday, as improving commuting times and transportation was the theme of the 6th New Year's policy discussion.
저는 그래서 선거 때부터 출퇴근 30분 시대를 약속드렸습니다. 출퇴근의 질이 바로 우리 삶의 질이기 때문입니다. 교통 격차 해소를 통해서 국민의 이 삶의 질을 확실하게 개선해 드리겠습니다. 당장 올해부터 본격적인 GTX 시대를 열겠습니다.
The GTX project officially started back in 2011. Many who work in Seoul opt for cheaper housing in Gyeonggi-do Province with a longer commute. The GTX was aimed to relieve this. Reducing commuting time also means that it could ease Seoul's intense real estate market as more people consider living further out from the capital. GTX lines confirmed so far are A, B, and C. A goes from Gyeonggi-do north of Seoul, cutting through before ending at the southern part of the province at Pyeongtaek Station. B cuts across horizontally and is set to start operating in 2030. While C also runs vertically, set to operate 2028. All have a maximum speed of 180 kilometers per hour, 3 times faster than the current Seoul metro system. More are being planned as well. Lines D, E, and F will be pushed by the current administration. Line E is set to connect to the nation's main international airport. On top of this, the government is looking to create similar express train systems in the nation's 4 biggest cities, including Busan. Also, according to the government, more projects are in the pipeline. They include underground highway systems and improving the public transit of other local districts. Altogether, it will be worth more than $100 billion, including private funding. Meanwhile, Thursday's discussion was held in the city of Uijeongbu of Gyeonggi-do Province, where the groundbreaking ceremony for Line C followed. President Yoon was there to amplify his message.
처음부터 끝까지 꼼꼼하게 직접 챙기겠습니다. 늦지 않고 제때 제대로 개통되게 하겠습니다. 국민과의 약속은 반드시 지킬 것입니다.
President Yoon also spoke to those involved in the construction of the projects, asking them for a speedy but safe completion. 김도현, 아리랑뉴스.
South Korea's real gross domestic product, which is a barometer of economic growth, went up 1.4% in 2023, meeting estimates by the central bank and the government. But that expansion marked the lowest since a 0.7% contraction in 2020 during the pandemic. Our Lee Soo-jin has the details.
South Korea's economy grew at its forecasted pace in 2023. Data from the Bank of Korea released on Thursday shows that the country's gross domestic product, a key indicator of economic growth, grew 1.4% last year, in line with the central bank's forecast. But the growth is nearly half that of the 2.6% on-year growth recorded in 2022 and the lowest seen in 3 years. The central bank mostly attributed the sluggish growth to weak private consumption as well as small increases in government spending, exports, and imports compared to previous years. Private consumption rose by only 1.8% on year, government spending by 1.3%, exports by 2.8%, and imports by 3%. In the fourth quarter last year, South Korea's economy grew by 0.6% on quarter, posting quarterly growth for the 4th consecutive quarter. Positive growth in quarter 4 was mostly led by an increase in exports thanks to a recovery in the chip sector. And the central bank expects the semiconductor-led recovery in the export sector seen towards the end of last year to continue this year as well.
We can see, just by looking at the data released by the Korea Customs Service for the first 20 days of January, that exports of semiconductors rose by a large margin, signaling that exports this year will also see a recovery led by semiconductors.
But will this be enough for South Korea to achieve its goal of a 2.1% economic growth this year? One expert is optimistic about the country's growth.
I'm personally positive in gaining over 2% growth for this year. As we talked about, the domestic expenditures of consumption and investment are expected to be worse than last year. So the remaining momentum drives Korean economy would be a stronger export. A chip market is highly expected to be recovered from the first half of this year.
The Bank of Korea official added that for South Korea to post stronger economic growth this year, both the government and the economic sector need to focus on mitigating key domestic and international issues that impact GDP, such as persistently low birth rates and remaining competitive on the global stage amid the rise of India and China. 이수진, 아리랑뉴스.
A 4-day work week sounds like such a dream work schedule for many workers around the world. But it's not just pie in the sky in South Korea, with firms starting to adopt a partial 4-day work week system. Our An Sung-jin has the details.
South Korea's largest steel manufacturer, POSCO, kicked off its new 4-day work week system this week. An employee at the firm is looking forward to taking every second Friday off so that he can spend time with family.
If I have 3 days off, it'll give me enough time to go on long-distance trips. For my first Friday off next week, I'm planning to go to the hot springs with my family to relax.
This became possible with POSCO's new work policy, where employees get every other Friday off if they fulfill an average of 40 working hours across 2 weeks. By introducing a 4-day work week, the company expects to create an environment that is more worker-friendly.
I think it's a positive change to give employees enough time to spend on personal development, childcare, or to rest with the extra day. Having a flexible work system allows us to build a more family-friendly work environment and gives a better work-life balance.
One economics expert says that introducing a 4-day work week could boost worker productivity.
With fewer working days, work is less dispersed, which means that concentration increases and boosts labor productivity.
The 4-day work week has been branching out to different industries, predominantly around IT companies. Samsung Electronics gives 1 Friday off per month, and SK Telecom allows employees to take 2 Fridays off. Severance Hospital also began a 4-day work week for nurses. However, the same expert notes that not all companies will be able to use a 4-day work week.
Only companies that can make a profit from a 4-day work week can do it. So it's important to take into account the different characteristics of each industry to decide the working system accordingly.
Others raise concerns that reduced working days may lead to more stress and an intense schedule as the amount of work stays the same.
The 5-day work week has been only placed in South Korea for 20 years. But these days, other countries such as those in North America and Europe have transitioned into a 4-day work week. Whether this will bring change in South Korea will be something to look out for. An Sung-jin, 아리랑뉴스.
Just over 16 centimeters tall and weighing nearly 200 grams, Fubao was the first giant panda born through natural breeding in South Korea. Now, the much-beloved 4-year-old will return to China in early April. All giant pandas in the world are owned by the Chinese government under the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora signed in 1973. It was made to regulate the cross-border trade of endangered plants and animals. And under the so-called panda diplomacy, China has been sending pandas to partner countries as a tool of diplomacy and a show of friendship. The theme park Everland, home to Fubao, said Tuesday that Fubao will be managed in a separate space for 1 month before her return to the research base of giant panda breeding in Sichuan province, China, which means Fubao will be able to greet visitors until early March now. The South Korean national football team stumbled into the knockout phase of the Asian Football Confederation Asian Cup after drawing 3-3 with Malaysia on Thursday over in Qatar. South Korean midfielder Chung Woo-young's 21st minute header gave the Taeguk Warriors a 1-0 lead at the Al Junoub Stadium. However, Malaysia replied with 2 second-half goals. PSG's Lee Kang-in scored his 3rd goal of the tournament in the 83rd minute to level the match. Captain Son Heung-min converted a penalty 4 minutes into added time for the 3-2 lead, but Malaysia snatched a last-gasp equalizer in the dying seconds. Now, the draw means the Taeguk Warriors finished the second in Group E and face Saudi Arabia in the round of 16. That match kicks off next Tuesday at 7 p.m. local time at the Education City Stadium. The Seoul Philharmonic, one of the oldest orchestras in Korea, recently appointed its new music director, Van Sveden. He held an inaugural concert with the orchestra featuring pianist Im Yoon-chan. Our culture correspondent Song Yoo-jin has this story.
Less than a month into his role as the music director of the Seoul Philharmonic Orchestra, Van Sveden says he's already feeling at home. His connection with Korea goes back decades.
My big violin teacher was a Korean man, Hyo Kang, who is still a very respected teacher at the Juilliard School. And I have very close contact still with him. But on stage, I've been working for many years with Korean artists.
Before coming to Korea, the Dutch conductor led the New York and Hong Kong Philharmonic Orchestras. Under his baton, the Hong Kong Philharmonic became the first Asian orchestra to be named Gramophone's Orchestra of the Year. Celebrating his new chapter in Korea, Seoul Philharmonic is holding a concert featuring pianist Im Yoon-chan, the winner of the 2022 Van Cliburn International Piano Competition. It's been only a few days since they started rehearsing together, but they've already found a rhythm.
I can smell, I can feel, I can see also that the history of this man is hard-working, serious musician. And that is always very touching and moving.
The two-day concert will provide a glimpse into the maestro's vision for the Seoul Philharmonic. Performing Mahler's Symphony No. 1 aligns with his goal of performing and recording all of Mahler's symphonies within his 5-year term.
And I think it will make the orchestra, it will put the orchestra in an extra layer of color, emotions, strength in the future.
For him, a top-tier orchestra consistently delivers excellence, and his aim is clear: to shape the Seoul Philharmonic into just that.
I think that maybe the road to heaven is maybe more beautiful than heaven itself. So being on the road with the orchestra is the big joy for me. And I hope also for the players in the orchestra.
And he hopes the audience feels the same.
We truly enjoy every concert that we play on stage. And so the enjoyment and the intensity, that is what we want to give the public.
Starting with this week's concert, Van Sveden will be opening up a new era with the Seoul Philharmonic Orchestra. 송유진, 아리랑뉴스.
This is all we have for this week. We thank you for watching Weekly News Highlights. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.